Knitting color work. It's the thing that makes your projects look amazing and your yarn look like... Today we are ranking 5 popular colorwork techniques, from so easy you could do it in your sleep to questioning your life choices. If you've ever wondered where to start or why you started in the first place, I've got you covered. Okay, let's do this. Easiest to hardest. Easiest at number 5, stripes. Why are stripes easiest? Knitting stripes is completely straightforward since you're only working with one color per row. The only additional step is switching the yarns at the beginning of the rows, making it the least technically demanding. I gotta say, stripes are the gateway drug of color work. The hardest part? Weaving in the ends. You could always just don't weave them in. Just make it fringe and call it a day. Kidding. Mostly. Really, the only issue you might encounter with stripes is when you're knitting them in the round and you get the dreaded jog when you change colors. Let's look at a few ways to deal with that. I'm knitting this adorable little striped gnome hat right now, so I thought this would be a good place to show you how to avoid the jog in your in-the-round stripes. Where I'm at right now is I've just done a full round in the new color, in the red, and I'm just going to knit a few stitches past the end of the round so I can show you what it looks like if you do nothing. So I'll just do a few. That's what you get if you do nothing, right there. You can see that very distinctive jog where it changes from one color to another on what looks like the same row. We don't want that. Let's try to do better. Okay, I've backed it up back to the beginning of the round, and here is a very simple method for mostly eliminating that jog, and that is just to slip the first stitch of that second round in the new color and carry on knitting. What that does is it's going to, especially when you come by on the next round, is it's going to pull that round up a bit. And you can see on my rounds down below, that is the method that I used. And you can see how there's just a little wiggle. So it's not quite perfect, but it's significantly better than that very jarring jog that we saw before, yes? So just slip the first stitch in the new color on the second round, and away you go. Now I'm going to knit up to the next stripe change, and I'll show you a different method courtesy of Patty Lyon's Knitting Bag of Tricks. Now I've knit up a little further so that I can show you a full stripe done in this second method for avoiding a jog, which in my opinion is considerably better than just slipping the first stitch. And this is what it looks like. So I'm back at the end of the round again, and this time what I am going to do is I'm going to take that last stitch of the previous color and pull it up onto the needle with the first stitch of the new color, and I'm going to knit those two together and drop it off, and then carry on knitting that round. And I don't normally knit like a slug, but I'm trying to do this while looking through my phone. You notice how there are only 3 stitches in those rows where we're adjusting for the jog, where we've got 4 rounds everywhere else, but only 3 showing where we correct the jog. Here's the jog point right there. And you'll notice in that previous method, the slip stitch method, that you still get that little wiggle, but with the new method where we're pulling up that stitch from the previous round, it's almost exactly a clean stripe. Pretty cool, hey? Now, these are just 2 variations of how to do this. There are about a bazillion other ways to do this, depending on whether you're doing 1 row stripes, 2 row stripes, more, you're doing patterns, you're doing pearls, you're doing Latvian braid. There's all kinds of ways to correct jogs, but these are 2 basic methods. So slipping the first stitch, or when you come around, knitting the stitch of the previous row with the first stitch. And I think, thank you very much, Patty Lyons, that is a much better way to do that. Now, stripes might be pretty basic and easy, but that doesn't mean that they have to be boring. As an example, this Sugarcoat cardigan that I'm wearing has a few basic stripes in the front, but I decided to get a little ambitious in the back and take those stripes, break them into 2 parts, and offset them a little bit. I will admit that doing that is not just straight up striping. There's a teeny tiny bit of Intarsia in there. We'll get to that a bit later. Yep, that's a spoiler. Another cool thing you can do with stripes is working them modularly. For instance, in my library blanket, these stripes were worked in standard bottom to top, and then the next set of stripes were worked in this direction by picking up a stitch off that last horizontal row at the end of every vertical row. Sounds complicated. Really? Not so much. Or you can just go super simple and do some really basic, classic 2-color stripes. This Westbourne pullover is one of my favorite summer knits. Next up, at number 4, slip stitch or mosaic color work. Why is this number 4? Slip stitch knitting is easier than stranding because you're only working with 1 yarn at a time and slipping the stitches from the other color to create the pattern. Because you change color every other row, it's a lot like doing stripes. So while it's simpler than stranded or intarsia, the patterns can look just as intricate. All of these projects were done with slip stitch color work. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you may have noticed that I have a fondness for slip stitch or mosaic color work. Let's go to the hand cam and I'll show you how it works. Here's a slip stitch colorwork project that I'm working on right now. This pattern is from the Artist Shawl by Natasha Hornby. I'm doing my own wrap over variation of this. Those of you that have been around for a while will know what I'm talking about. Those of you who aren't, there's a link up at the top of the page you can go check out. So this looks like a pretty complex piece of color work. However, it's a lot like stripes, as I said, because I'm only using 1 color at a time. You can see I have these 2 colors attached here over in my pretty yarn ball. The way slip stitch color work works is you're knitting with the color of the working yarn, which in this case is the teal, and we're either going to be knitting into or slipping the previous row's color, which is the cream. It's really pretty straightforward. I don't have the chart in front of me, so I'm doing this by memory, but I know I need to knit 4, and then I'm going to slip 1, and then I'm going to knit another 4 in the teal. And then I'm going to slip these 3. If you see me knitting into the back of stitches or reorienting them, it's because I am a combination knitter, which means I wrap my purl stitches backwards and I have to reorient them on the right side. I always get a question about that. I have videos about why I do that. So here I am knitting 4, slip 1, knit 4, slip 3, 4, and that's it. And then on the row on the way back, We'll pretend that I've gone to the end of the row and I'm coming back. All I'm doing, I don't even have to look at the chart for this next row, is I'm going to purl or knit the same stitches that I worked on the right side and slip the same stitches I slipped on the right side. Some slip stitch color work will be stockinette like this, and some will be garter stitch like this, where every stitch is knit whether you're on the right or wrong side. And this is what the back of slip stitch work looks like. You can see there's a double strand of each color that's being slipped. So the main thing to understand about this type of color work is that you're working every row twice. You're working across and back so that you get back to where your other color is and you can work the next pair of rows. That does mean that slip stitch color work will take you twice as long as stranding. But for me, the extra time is worth it because I do not have to worry about carrying 2 yarns or my tension being anything but mostly perfect with no effort. And you gotta like that. You can see that slip stitch knitting is the magician's trick of color work. You're only ever holding 1 yarn. The pattern makes it look like you worked harder than you did. Lazy genius energy, my favorite kind. You nailed it, Oscar. And right at the middle in number 3 is stranded knitting with 2 colors. Why? 2-colored stranded knitting is more manageable than 3-color, that's coming later, but still requires control over tension and yarn dominance. The difficulty in 2-colored stranding comes from maintaining an even gauge and ensuring that the floats across the back aren't too tight or too loose. This is the part of stranded knitting that makes me lean towards mosaic. Stranded color work is really where the training wheels come off. You're holding 2 strands, managing tension, and trying not to strangle your project with the floats. Let's take a look and see what middle of the road color work looks like. For 2-color stranding, you're working with 2 yarns as you work across, alternating between them to create a pattern. The key to 2-color stranding is you need to decide how you're going to handle working those 2 yarns. One method, and one that I quite like to use, is having them both on my left finger. Now, I am a combination knitter, which means I'm a continental knitter who purls in reverse. So if you're a continental knitter who carries the yarn in your left, you may find this a preferable way to deal with the 2 yarns for you. I'll show you a 2-handed method in a moment. So this is how it works to follow the chart. I'm going to pick the dark color and then the light color and then the dark color again, just like that. And I want to be consistent about which yarn is on top and which yarn is on the bottom, because that can affect the dominance of that color in the stitch work. Yarn dominance is a whole thing that could actually take up a whole video, so I'm not going to get too much into it here. All it means is that one or the other color is going to pop forward more. So that's picking off of the same finger. My other alternative is to ditch the yarn thimble and carry a yarn in each hand. So with this method, I would be picking the dark color off my left hand, and with my right hand, I would be throwing the light color over top. Obviously, the downside of two-handed stranding or two-handed fair isle is that it's going to take a while for you to get comfortable working with both hands if you've only ever knit with either your right or your left. And I just want to say this about the yarn thimble. As far as I know, it's only meant for use on the left hand. I've never seen anybody use it on the right, but I'm pretty sure somebody probably has somewhere. I think it would be a bit trickier because you're throwing with your right. You'd end up bringing both colors around at the same time. However, I'm sure somebody out there has figured out how to use it on the right hand. And also, I may not even be using this correctly. If I'm not, feel free to call me out in the comments. I just bought it and started using it. It probably would behoove me to watch a video or two to make sure I'm doing it properly. But again, I do so much mosaic color work that stranding like this has not been on my radar in the past year at all. And because I know you're going to ask me, this infinity cowl was designed by Jamie Lomax. She's the one who does those really cool doodle decks. This is a doodle deck. Pick a card, any card, stack them on top of each other, and create your own stranded masterpiece. 100% addicting. And the bonus of an infinity cowl like this is that your floats are all hidden inside. So I don't even bother catching the extra long floats. They're not going to snag on anything. They're super happy and cozy, tucked away inside this double layer. I also suspect you're going to ask me about this sweater. There is no pattern for this sweater. This is my own design, and no, I haven't written it up yet. But in a few weeks, I'm going to start a class with Kim McBrien-Evans on designing your own dream yoke sweater. And with any luck, the pattern for this will materialize from that class. Fingers crossed. Difficulty number 2, Intarsia. Why is Intarsia number 2? Because it involves creating blocks of color without carrying the yarn across the back. In other words, you need a separate ball of color for each section. Switching the colors neatly and managing the multiple strands or ends or whatever you're using are particularly challenging, especially for beginners, but even for those of us who are more experienced. You might recognize this piece from last week's video where you got a little sneak peek of it. I knit this back in the early 1990s when I was just a baby knitter. It's from a book called Knitted Masterpieces, and it is based on a Paul Gauguin painting called When Will You Marry? I knit it when I didn't know any better. It's cotton. I was out of my mind. This is what the inside looks like.
Uh-huh.
And yes, that is every bit as crazy and challenging as it looks. This is a sample piece of Intarsia that I'm working on. I'm going to show you this up close in just a minute. I used the chart from a mosaic piece that I'm working on right now so that you can see the difference between working up the same chart in Intarsia versus slip stitch. And because you're going to ask, this sweater that I'm wearing, which is Joinery by Yumiko Alexander, is only sort of kind of Intarsia. I don't actually have any Intarsia sweaters that I've knit for myself. This one qualifies because there are blocks of color joined together with a twist, only it's the whole knitting being twisted, not just the yarn. So we looked at this bit of mosaic slip stitch color work earlier, and now we're going to look at how to do the same charted pattern in Intarsia. This is an Intarsia version. This is 1 color per row. This is 17 colors per row, and it's only 4 repeats. Let's look at them up close. All right, here's this crazy piece of Intarsia. This is what the Intarsia looks like on the wrong side. I've woven most of the ends in here just so you can get a better picture of what's going on. These back here are the live ends that I'm still currently working with. Over on this side, the ends are not woven in yet, so I've got all of those live ends across the top, all the working yarn, and all of these non-woven in ends down here. So you can see how much extra work Intarsia can be. And the first thing you might be asking is, Nicole, it looks like you're only doing 2 colors across the row. So why on earth would you choose to do that with Intarsia? Well, the answer to that is you wouldn't. You would only do Intarsia in this instance if you wanted to put a different color in all of these spots. If that were the case, I can't do stranded knitting because there's too many colors involved. You'd have to carry, 4 or 5 or 6 different colors across the row, and that's just too unwieldy. So what you do instead is each little color section gets its own strand or mini ball of yarn. Do you remember those little plastic bobbins? Those little things used to make me so angry when I would do Intarsia that I don't even have any anymore. They just tangled around each other like crazy, and I found that I would end up wrapping so much yarn around them that they were so heavy that they were messing with my tension. The other alternative, you can take a long strand of yarn if you want and make a little figure 8 butterfly and secure it and have that dangling down from the bottom. However, I also find that the butterflies tangle and that they either release the yarn too quickly or not quickly enough. So what I do instead is what looks like this crazy disaster here, but there's actually some method to this madness. I learned this from Kaif Fassett. And yep, it's pronounced Kaif Fassett. It rhymes with safe asset. I've met the man, so I'm positive about that. Anyway, Kaif is a color fiend, and he has always believed that more is more. And if he has his way, you work with 20 or 30 colors at a time. Now, having 20 or 30 little bobbins dangling off the bottom of this and having them all tangle around each other is bananas. So instead, he just uses yard or yard and a half lengths of yarn and just let them be there. Let's just do a little bit of it so you can see what it looks like. So we're going to start back here and we'll just purl. And yes, I am purling backwards because I am a combination knitter. So we purl those 3 and then we drop the gold. We're going to pick up the white, which is the next stitch, from underneath and make sure that that gold and that white are twisted. And then we're going to purl those 3. And the next stitch is a single gold. And yep, we have to twist it. So we drop the white. We pick up the gold. I give it a little tug to make sure I've got the right yarn. Wrap it, and then we're going to drop it, pick up the next weight from underneath, and wrap it, purl, 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 drop it, pick up the gold from underneath, wrap it. The reason we have to make sure they're twisted each time is so that we don't end up with a big hole or gap between the colors. And then what I can do with that tail is literally just pull it through that tangled mess and it will just pull right out without any problem. I know it looks like this is all going to knot together, but trust me, it doesn't. You just keep pulling it through every time and it's just fine. So that's the little bit we just did right there. So like I said, you wouldn't actually choose to do Intarsia if you just had 2 colors. You would be stranding across. You'd either do slip stitch, like I did previously with this pattern, or stranding, where you're carrying both yarns across every row. But if we wanted each of these elements to be a different color, you need to do it like this. The other thing you need to know about Intarsia is that it's not designed to be done in the round, because as you knit across, you can see that after I knit that little section right there on the right side, the working yarn finishes on this side. If I was to knit in the round and come back around to this spot, ready to knit those 3 stitches again, my yarn is on the wrong side. So you can't do that. Now, there is a way to do Intarsia in the round. There are hacks. I've never actually done it, but the Nimble Needles channel has a great blog tutorial and video to show you how to make that happen. I think there are a fair bit of limitations to it, but it can be done. I'll put a link in the description box for you. So here you go. This is the madness that is Intarsia. It seems to be making a comeback, but I'm scratching my head a little bit as to why that's happening. Let me know what you think. Do you love doing Intarsia? Is there a particular pattern out there right now that really intrigues you and you'd like to give it a try? Let us know. We're all curious. What do you think? Did the Intarsia make you a bit squeamish? It does that for me too. Do you want to take a look at the hardest color work now? I thought you might. And finally, number 1 and arguably the hardest color work to knit, stranded knitting in 3 colors. Why is this the hardest? Managing the 3 strands at once is tricky. It requires excellent tension control to avoid puckering, consistent yarn dominance, in other words, keeping each of those strands on the same level, and skill in holding the multiple strands on your fingers without getting them tangled. It is arguably the most complex in terms of coordination and technique and just plain old frustratedness. This is the Olympics of color work. You're juggling 3 yarns, fighting for your life to keep your tension even, and praying to the knitting gods that your floats behave. Let's go to the hand cam one more time and I'll show you how tense I am trying to maintain the tension. Now, this should come as no surprise, but what we're dealing with for 3 color stranding is those same 2 colors that we used for 2 color stranding and, of course, a 3rd color. And what you need to figure out is how are you going to handle those 3 strands as you work your way across your chart. What I'm going to do is combine the 2 methods that I showed you for the 2 color stranding. So I'm going to use 2 colors on 1 finger with the help of my handy dandy thimble. And for the 3rd color, I'm going to handle it as if I was doing 2-handed stranding. So here we go. Wish me luck. My first stitch is a brown. My second stitch is a blue, so I'm going to throw that from my right hand. My next stitch is a brown, so I'm going to pick that from my left hand. Then I've got a white, so I'm going to pick that from my left hand. I'm going to scoop my stitches along. I'm always pulling my stitches apart on that right needle to make sure that I'm not choking up my floats. And then in this little section, I've got a brown. I'm going over top of that blue this time, so a brown again. Okay, this next one's going to be a white on top of that brown, and then another white, and another white, and another white, stretching out, brown, and finally coming from way over there, I'm going to throw that blue. And then it's back to picking, alternating browns and whites. Getting a sense of how that's working? Now, this obviously isn't a masterclass on how to do 3-color stranding, but I just wanted to show you that this is one way that you can deal with managing 3 yarns. This way, you need to use both hands. I'm sure there are people who have used 3 or more piece thimbles and they're putting all of the strands on one hand and picking them up as they need them. I might get one of those and try that someday, but I don't do this 3-color stranding business all that often because for me, if I want to throw a 3rd color into the mix, here's how I'm going to do it. Duplicate stitch. So you're going to take that 3rd color, thread it onto a tapestry needle, anchor it in the back. Duplicate stitch is the process of following the path of the stitches that have already been knit. So I came up at the base of this V and I'm going to follow the path of that V. I'm going to go up behind the stitch above it, draw it through, keeping it a little loose. We want to make sure we don't pull too tight. And then go back down into the base of the V, come up in the next V, pull through, go behind the stitch above it, down into the V, up into the next one. You see how this is going? This is an alternative to stranding with 3 colors. All of these places where I have added that 3rd color through stranding, I could have just gone over the work after the fact with duplicate stitch and popped those in, and it would look very much the same to what you see here. I think with lots of practice, 3-color stranding might go fairly smoothly. It's not something that I do a lot or plan to do a lot, so I'm probably never going to get super good at it. If you're super good at it, tell us down in the comments. We want to be impressed with you. See what I mean? If you can do this, you deserve a medal and maybe even a massage. My cowl? Yeah, I'm cheating again. This looks like 3-color stranding, but it's actually 3-color slip stitch knitting because I'm not crazy. So just to recap, here was the ranking from easiest to hardest. Stripes, beginner bliss. Slip stitch, lazy brilliance. Stranded 2-color, slightly chaotic, but manageable. Intarsia, no. And 3-color stranding, master level madness. Which technique was your favorite or least favorite? Or would you put them in a different order? I'm thinking Intarsia and 3-color stranding are pretty close competitors. Tell us in the comments, and if you're thinking about trying 3-colored stranded knitting, I recommend loosening up with a stiff drink. This is my idea of dry January. I say goodbye, Oscar says goodbye, and until next time, keep your needles clicking and your floats loose. And here's the link to my video on mosaic knitting. Go watch that and you'll quickly find out why it's my favorite. Bye!